Okay, I think I'll start right now. So if any of the guys from the hall will join, they'll join eventually. Okay. Okay. So my colleague here talked about Docker in technology means, but right now we'll talk about Docker for Drupal. It was previously 2.0, now it's 2.1, and we'll talk about it in developer sense. So basically, I'm targeting here on developers who will use Docker to develop some projects. So this is meant for Drupal developers primarily, but it can be also used for other projects. So, my name is Dalibor Stojakovic. I'm a lead developer and architect in Web Solutions Agency. I'm over 10 years in IT, and right now I'm working on Drupal and loving it. And that's basically, I've worked on numerous technologies, but right now I'm on Drupal. So, this session will be shorter, so I'll move on to the point. So, what's Docker for Drupal? This is a set of optimized containers for Drupal. It's designed primarily for local development, and you can take Docker Compose YAML, modify it to your needs, and it will work, basically. So supported Drupal versions are 6, 7, and 8. PHP versions 5.3, 5.6, 7, 7.1. Requirements are you are installing Docker, which is higher than 1.12, and additionally Docker Compose for Linux. And that's basically all the things you need to start working on Docker. Downside, it has poor performance on Mac OS, but there is some kind of workaround like Docker Sync for this. For this, you can check the link below how to use it. These are containers that are available for Docker for Drupal. We have NGINX, which is on 1.1, and it's optimized for Drupal. Right now, I also am happy to say that they will include Apache also in the next several months, so you can also expect that. There's a Drupal container, which contains 6, 7, and 8 versions. There is PHP containers with 5.3, 5.6, 7, 7.1 version. MariaDB, Redis, Varnish, Solar, Memcached, Mailhog for catching your emails, PHP MyAdmin, and Node.js, and Traefik. Traefik is the latest addition, major addition to Docker for Drupal, and it is used as a container which handles domains for your environment. How to do it, I'll show it in the next slides. By default, you'll have enabled NGINX Drupal, I mean vanilla. I'll talk about what's what with this container, and MariaDB and Mailhog. That's it. For other things, you'll have to uncomment the code. So, why to use it? Basically, in our experience, developers lose some time to set up their environments when they are starting the project. They need to, I don't know, set up a Solar, set up Redis, set up a web server, database, everything, and with this you get started up real fast. And it's much faster than Vagrant because you don't need any extra VMs for this on Linux environments. And this is basically one of the major things why you as a developer would use it. There are many other benefits of using it, but for you as a local developer, this is one of the main things. So usage. You can use this in two ways. There's vanilla Drupal, which comes with installation of Drupal, and these are the available images. So you have version 8, 7, and 6, each with its own PHP versions, or you can mount your own code base, which is practically blank PHP, and you can then mount your own project there. Okay, so before starting, you need to fix permission issues with the syncing. You'll have to add user with ID 82 to your host, and also add yourself to the group so that you don't have any side effects. For example, when you are exporting configuration from Drupal and stuff. So these are the commands how you can use it on Linux and on macOS below. And why 82 is because images are using Alpine Linux, so this is a standard user for this distro. Okay. Running vanilla Drupal from image is basically you download the Docker Compose YAML file, then you update your version for Drupal you are meant to use. You can see the standard. It's would be /Drupal version, then PHP version and stability tag. And run containers with Docker Compose up -d. -d is basically for running in the background. And that's basically it. You are waiting for a few seconds to initialize, and you can access the site on drupal.docker.localhost and port sign. Default settings, everything is called Drupal, so user, database, DB name, and database host is MariaDB. So you can see this kind of naming standards, drupal.docker.localhost. So Traefik by default catches everything that is ending on drupal.localhost, and it's passing it to the config file. So right now, if you don't want to add any configuration in your host file, you'll name your project host like project.docker.localhost. Okay, so in another way, if you are using Docker4Drupal for mounting your own Drupal codebase, then you will comment out the vanilla Drupal, enter only the Drupal/PHP and some tag of the version you want, replace PHP image to the same standard, and update NGINX and PHP volumes to use. For example, this is example for a current directory to be accessible in those containers. Update NGINX server root to, I don't know, var/www/html or /web. I mean, this is a /web, for example, if you use Docker project composer template or something. And ensure that your settings PHP also is using same credentials. So after that, you will import your existing database. We'll check this how to do it when we get to MariaDB, and also you can comment out several lines to import it directly on the first mount. Optionally, you can also uncomment the line to run additional services like Redis, Solr, or other services. And configuring domains. So you can also configure domain to be other than this default one chosen here. After that, you'll just up the containers, and you'll find it accessible on this link below. So domain configuration, this is done with Traefik container. It's handled all the routing for your needs. Default setup is to use port 8000 to avoid potential conflicts, but if it's if it is free on your local environment, you can use that. And these are the default domain configurations for services that are currently inside Docker Compose YAML file. So this is for NGINX, for PHPMyAdmin, for Mailhog, for Solar, Node, and Varnish. So domain configuration, how to configure domain for each environment. Basically, they are marked as labels inside the Compose YAML file, and then you can choose which services to which port and the rule for naming those domains. So this is, for example, for the PHPMyAdmin. So working with Docker containers, with Docker Compose, basically most used commands are for upping the containers, for stopping them, for downing. So don't use down because you'll lose all your data, but this is also a command which is used when you want to like delete everything. So don't use it unless you really want to delete the containers. You just stop and that's it. And also for accessing, you'll access each of the containers. For example, Docker Compose execute PHP is a container, then sh, and then you'll see the bash for that. Also for pulling all the latest version of images and for restarting the application. Okay, so so we covered that. Let's move to multiple projects. So if you are running multiple projects inside the same directory, you can set up your entire code base to be like development, and then inside you can have like site 1, site 2, site 3, site 4. I don't know how much environments you need, and then you can use Traefik to handle the routing to each of the sites. So how you can do this is basically create one folder called development, called sites for each site, and then write it down inside the Traefik YAML file. You'll see the Traefik YAML file example in the next slide. So you can find the basic Traefik YAML file on Docker4Drupal Git repository, and then you can copy it inside this development folder. And inside each of the sites, they'll have to contain the standard Docker Compose file, which will link to the networks that are inside Traefik YAML. So if you, and then when you edit the Traefik YAML file, you'll link the networks to each of your site. So basically how this will look like is something like this. So you'll have your couple of projects, and basically you'll create a network for them. And then inside the Docker Compose YAML of each folder, you'll set the networks to the site 1 NGINX _ site 1 or something like that. Okay, for this example for Traefik, I'll also set up a code which you can download and to see how it really looks like, and you can play with it. Traefik is not meant only for Drupal, so you can use it for pretty much any PHP project, and it will handle routing accordingly. I've placed it in this example for just index PHP. Just a minute. Okay. So if you want to check out the logs of the Docker containers, you can check them with Docker -compose logs or -f if you want to see the real-time logs of each of the container. Let's move on to the NGINX. So NGINX is available at 8 version for optimized for Drupal 8 version, 7 version, and 6 version. There are 3 available images, so you'll use the one you are using for your website. The syntax, which you can see above, is based on Drupal version, NGINX version, and then stability tag. This will not change. They'll modify only the stability tag for it. This is something of a standard they've developed in version 2, so it should stick to the to other versions as well. This is the example config of the NGINX file. So you can see that it has an image tag. It depends on the PHP environment. You have your environment variables here. You can set them up as you need for your project. Volume setup. So basically, this is the code you want to copy to HTML directory, and the labels, which is defining the traffic rules. So basically, this will be accessible to site docker.localhost domain. These are the environment variables that are available for the NGINX container. So you can see that for this image, sorry. So you can see everything here that can be changed in this particular image. For all images, there's a set of available environment variables. So they are not, everything is not inside the documentation of Docker4Drupal, but can be visible on Woodbee's website. So, let's move on to PHP container. PHP is used with NGINX via PHP FPM, and images are available with PHP versions 5.3, 5.6, 7, 7.1. List of environment variables are pretty long for this, so you can check them at this link. And it comes pre-installed with Drush, Composer, and Drupal launcher, but for console, you'll have to include it in your project to be used. So for Drush example, you can use it outside of container with Docker compose execute user 82, so that you execute this with user 82 and then Drush some command. And for Composer, you can also do something similar. But I would like to note that if you have like a subdirectory, like a website subdirectory, it will not, you will not be able to use it something like this, but you'll have to like do Docker compose execute PHP sh and then go inside this directory and then call Drush. But generally Drush works inside the container. Okay, for Xdebug, so PHP developers use debugging. That's pretty much standard, so you'll need this. For Xdebug, you'll have to enable the first 2 lines. And this is a PHP Xdebug 1 and default enable. You can also uncomment this for remote auto start to start your Xdebug immediately. This is pretty much it for Linux. So if you are using Linux, you don't need anything else. PHP Storm will automatically pick up Xdebug from here. But if you are using a Mac, then you need some other settings to get it to work. So you need to like do pretty much the same as above, but also you need to uncomment remote connect back, remote host, and you also have to have like a loopback alias of the IP from above. So you can do it temporarily or permanently. If you do it temporarily, you can do it with this command. And for permanent settings, you need to create loopback plist and set it up something like this. So basically here you have alias which will be used for Xdebug. Okay. For Windows, it's pretty much the same as for Mac, but you'll need to set it to your DockerNet IP. This is the default one 10.0.75.1, but you can check what's yours on environment. Also, if it's not working on Windows, it may be that firewall is blocking you, so check that also. So for PHPUnit, inside the Docker, so you have inside the Drupal core directory, you have phpunit.xml.dist file, and then you have to rename it to PHPUnit and change the simple test base URL to NGINX. And in order to ensure that DB connection is working also, you'll have to change simple test DB to your MySQL username, password, MariaDB as the MariaDB container, and then database, which you have database inside your project. So this is the example of the PHP, and here we have like images, environment settings, and volumes. You can pretty much put here many other, but this is like a basic example of what to use for the PHP config. Okay, and this send email path, it's sending to the mailhog container, so every email you send, you can see inside the mailhog container and check them out with the UI. Okay. MariaDB, this is the default database server for Docker4Drupal. It has also a pretty long list of environment variables, so you can check them on this documentation link. It uses a persistent volume defined in Docker file. So one more time, don't use down because you'll lose your data, and use Docker compose stop. For importing, you can uncomment, for initial import, you can uncomment the line for MariaDB folder and place the SQL file you want there, and then on up it will import it. But of course, this is not like one-time option. You can also use Drush for import. You can use MySQL commands for import and for dumping. I'll show that below. You can also use the PHPMyAdmin container for importing a smaller amount of database. So exporting all databases from host. So this is how it looks like. You can run Drush, Docker Compose, Docker Compose execute, MariaDB execute, MySQL, dump all databases or single one. And this is the example config file for MariaDB. So here we have like environment settings, image volumes, and that's pretty much it. Also, if you set up the PHPMyAdmin, make sure that passwords match up, hosts and stuff. Now we get to Redis. Redis is also included in the Docker4Drupal. You have a list of environment variables on the Redis documentation at Woodbees. Redis is pretty quickly configurable in Docker4Drupal. Basically, you uncomment lines for Redis and install Redis volume pointed to Redis. And you add this is the example for Drupal 7 configuration. So you are adding pretty much standard configuration for Drupal, except for the host, you'll place the Redis instead of, I don't know, some IP or something, and it will pick up the Redis container. And this is pretty much it for Drupal 7, and for Drupal 8, it's slightly different, but pretty much same logic. You'll also configure the bins here, and host will also be Redis. If you want to use Memcached, you also uncomment the lines for Memcached, download and install Memcached module, uncomment. You can also place these lines in settings PHP or settings local, whatever you use. Set up the default cache classes, and you'll be up and running. So just see how easy it is to set up these environments. You don't have to pretty much install everything. You'll uncomment a couple of lines, set it in settings, and you'll get your running environment. So this is like a great benefit to developers. I mean, now we get to Apache Solr. So this is one other example for the configuration. So if you want to set up Drupal and Solr to work together with Apache Solr, you'll have to set the configuration which is defined inside the module file, but with Docker4Drupal you don't need to do any of this. So these images are already set up as they need to be for each Drupal version. So basically, when you set up Solr image, when you are upping the image, you need to only create core. There's a command for creation of the core, which is set up here. So basically, you would say Docker execute -ti your ID, which your ID will be, for example, project_Solr_1, and then core equals some core you want, and it will create the core which is already configured for Drupal versions you are meant to use, and you defined it here. So basically, when you requested would be Drupal Solr 8, it will know that this needs to be for Drupal version 8 and stuff. So, and when you set up 5.5, it will know that this is for Solr version 5.5. Okay. So after you set this up, of course, you need to also configure it inside the Srce API. So you will need to set Solr as the host, similar to Redis. Like you set up Redis as the host, you'll set up Solr here, standard port, and path core for the core you already named it here. So, and you're done. So basically, from a configuration perspective, you uncommented some lines of code and created the core with a single command, and that's it. So for Apache Solr, that's pretty great, considering you would need to install Solr, set it up on your environment and stuff. Okay, so this is an example of Apache Solr. So you are setting this image environment variable and label it to be visible at Solr. For example, localhost, and you will be able to see it there. You'll be able to see the admin UI. Okay, so for Varnish, it's also similar to the ones prior to this. So you'll download and install Varnish module and uncomment the lines for Varnish and place configuration settings inside the settings PHP or settings PHP local. Set your control key and you'll be up and running. So Varnish has this kind of syntax. You have it's pretty much standard for all images. So set up your environment variables, set up your labels for traffic, for which it depends on, and that's basically it. It has environments variables that are listed here, so you can set this any way you want it, and you are done with the Varnish setup. So here's a list of Docker additional helpful commands to list your Docker volume list, or remove some of the volumes you don't need, or kill all running containers, or delete all stopped containers. This is basically some of the tags I listed here because maybe you want to do some kind of cleanup of your local environment. So basically, for some projects you don't need anymore and you want to delete these old volumes or containers. And for deleting all images. So if you are interested in this topic and want to learn more, you can check out these links for Docker4Drupal, for Traefik, for Composer, or for Docker Composer, or for Docker in general. There's pretty a lot of ground to cover in this like small amount of time. So if anyone is interested, he can check any of these links and we'll get like a full documentation of these topics. You can also download the Traefik test code on the link below, but I'll also probably send it to Yasmina or someone to set it on the campsite. And you can check how you can set up the Traefik for individual sites locally. And that's pretty much it. So if anyone has any questions or something. Okay, do we have here somewhere? No. No. Thank you all then and enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.